Okay, welcome to Athens City Council. It's about 7 o'clock on September 12th. This is a meeting night when council will be meeting in committee sessions. We have 3 committees that are meeting tonight. Planning and Development, which will begin in just half a minute here, the Arts and Recreation Committee, and Finance and Personnel. It's been probably 6 weeks since we've had committee meetings. We have quite a long agenda, so we're going to try and move it fairly rapidly. The first item on the Planning and Development Committee meeting is a report to us from National Church Residences, developers for the proposed retirement center on Stimson Avenue. They would like to come to us and update us on what's been happening with that project in the almost 2 months since we've spoken with them last. This is not a meeting at which we will have intense discussions which might lead to an ordinance. We hope to schedule that meeting soon. This is really just a let's listen to the information. If council members have pertinent questions, please feel to answer them, but we're not going to get into a lot of give and take tonight. I see that coming in the near future. Same with audience members. If you have something that can't wait, certainly it's an open meeting, but we'll have a chance for a more full discussion in 2-3 weeks, okay? NCRC, go ahead.
Members of Council, my name is Jerry Kwiat, Chief Operating Officer for National Church Residences Healthcare. Over the past 2 years, we've been working with a wonderful and vibrant group of Athens residents interested in the provision of a continuing care retirement community in this region. The journey has involved discussions with Ohio University and several public meetings with residents of Athens, students, business owners, and City Council. We at NCR feel the process has been thorough and beneficial to us as developers in an effort to come to a resolution that best serves this community. Since we began this process, NCR has been busy across the country opening 10 new facilities for affordable and middle-income seniors with an additional 18 under development. We have initiated expansion of all 5 of our healthcare properties, including the opening of 2 new home healthcare agencies serving over 150 people daily. The NCR board is committed to quality growth. We've been busy on many fronts, as have each of you. Despite our growth, the project here in Athens remains a priority for our organization. We believe the need for it remains and will remain. We respect your thoroughness and stand ready to build a project that will serve the citizens in a way that will add value to the community at large. I wanted to take just a minute to describe the project as it has been planned. The emphasis of the facility is independent living with the availability of supportive services. The project would have a total of 151 units, 115 or 76% as 1- and 2-bedroom apartments with 4 cottages. A 36-unit assisted living facility would be available and be built to nursing home construction, safety, and space requirements. Residents would have access to home health care, rehabilitative therapy, and other specialized services such as hospice should the need arise. No, we do not have licensed nursing home beds in this project. It would be our desire to add a small number of nursing home beds if and when they become available in the future. We maintain, however, that a full array of services will be available on the site. A continuum of care will exist. No, we initially will have no Medicaid reimbursement, and Medicare coverage for services would be through home health care agency. You've heard me on more than one occasion use the term lifestyle choice. National statistics demonstrate that in a market rate independent housing project, the majority of residents who enter the community are 75 years of age and over, and generally over 50% are single. We anticipate many couples, some in their 60s, may choose this accommodation, but would doubt that it would be the majority. Our emphasis remains on an independent lifestyle aided by facilities for exercise, restaurant-style dining, and a superb location. The access to assisted living, home health, and memory care Alzheimer's services are healthcare support primarily for those who have selected an apartment for their long-term residence. I have heard much discussion and read a little more in the Athens Messenger about University Estates. I personally have known the president of healthcare facilities out of Lima for over 20 years. Jim Unverfurth is a good man and is a leader in the healthcare field. From what I can discern, the project sounds exciting and should meet many needs in the community through upscale homes and a state-of-the-art nursing facility. We simply suggest that our proposed facility meets different needs, and I believe could effectively coexist with our neighbors at University Estates. Most of our previous discussions have centered around the site and its suitability for development. We respectfully request that as we endeavor to answer the remaining concerns in this area, that Council consider a resolution allowing us to proceed. We believe that our proposed facility will be an asset to the Athens community and the citizens it serves. We thank you for your continual consideration of its merits. Now I would like to ask George Berardi of Berardi Partners Architects and John Renicky, project engineer from EMHT, to describe the results of soils testing and flood modeling that have been conducted over the last 6 weeks. First, we'll ask Josh to step forward. Good.
Good evening. I will try to keep this relatively free of technical jargon for those of you that are here. Our task as part of this project was to utilize a floodplain model developed within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers HEC-RAS modeling software. The model was developed by the Army Corps. We were suggested at the direction of the City of Athens to use the Army Corps' most recent modeling of the Hocking River. And through the analysis of that model, we are able to alter the cross sections of the stream of the river as they cross through the NCR site. And with that modeling, we are then able to represent the proposed fill that would be necessary to elevate the structures above the 100-year flood elevation. And then from that, assess the impact, if any, on the 100-year flood elevations due to the fill being placed in the floodplain. Through our analysis, which is detailed in a report, which I have multiple copies here of for those on City Council who would like to review it, I also have copies of the electronic modeling itself on CD-ROM disk that I will happily provide as well for the City Council and City administrative staff to review. Through that analysis, again, which is summarized in the report, which includes mapping of the area, the increase in 100-year water surface elevations is 0.02 feet, which is approximately a quarter inch. And that's the only impact from this particular project. And that's really about all we've got from the technical modeling analysis. And again, we have copies of the report that we can provide in both hard copy and electronic format. And I'll now hand it over to Mr. George Berardi. Oh, we do also, as part of the technical written report, have mapping that was initially provided by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It is a GIS formatted map, which was prepared then by folks at EMH&T that actually got their geography masters from Ohio University. So when I said I was coming down here, they were asking for me to look for people that they knew so I could say hello for them. So again, this mapping is provided here for brief review and in every copy of the report that we will hand off to the council. Thank you.
Members of council, I'm George Berardi. The primary emphasis of our involvement since the last time was really to analyze the basic structure involved, and one of the primary elements necessary for us was to obtain soils analysis. So we completed a soils investigation of the entire area of the site where we would have our building, and it was primarily related to the corners of the buildings associated with areas close to easements, but primarily the corners where there was some concern previously with regard to subsurface impact of the superimposed loads that we're talking about. Effectively, geotechnical consultants of Columbus, again, completed a variety of tests. Number one, soils borings, exactly as they were asked to in the locations of the building, and completed some additional soils analysis, reviewed soil structure, obviously, as part of their complete study for us. Their conclusion was that we do have some not very good soils in some areas of the building pad. And much as I had discussed during previous meetings and presentations, it isn't unusual to have a site where we have to modify the structure consistent with the soil type that we have. What Geotechnical Consultants has provided for us are 5 or 6 different methods of treatment of the foundations, or providing suggestions of the foundation type that could be used without modifying the soil structure. One of the things that they did suggest was, rather than increasing some of our costs by developing greater structure to be able to sustain the superimposed loads, is to simply remove some of the soils and replace them with compactable materials. So there are a number of methods that are available to us. Number one, as I said, would be to remove some of the unusable soils and replace them with suitable fills. Same quantities, but usable fills that could be compacted to levels that the superimposed loads would be, or that would be able to support the superimposed loads, or come back in with a variety of foundation systems. I'll mention several: large spread footings, caissons, pilings. It isn't unusual on buildings of this nature to have pilings. Effectively, you would have pilings at critical points in the building, and then you would span between the pilings. For example, if the pilings were located at 25 feet on center, you would span between those with what we refer to as grade beams, which are large concrete structures that span between the pilings, and then we build our building on top of that. So again, as I indicated in previous meetings, there are means and methods by which we can develop suitable structural systems consistent with the soils, or again, as I said, replace the soil. With that, I would leave it open to questions.
Okay. Thank you all for your succinct presentation and responding to the concerns that we last spoke about. Again, I'll remind you that this is not intended to be an in-depth meeting that will follow soon. However, if there are some questions that we need to ask now, council members, questions, comments, quickly, Paul?
Status of the drainage plan?
Drainage,
We're talking about a drainage plan?
rainwater?
Yes.
Okay. Is there, we can,
The drainage plan wasn't completed at this point, but we could complete a drainage plan by the next meeting. The primary emphasis of this meeting was to present
Right.
these studies that were produced. But we will produce a drainage
Okay.
plan as well.
to come?
I guess there are several other things that we had raised during the work session and in earlier meetings, and I guess that would be the same status, like the access for the Red Cross to their building, the need for the sewer easements, and how you'll be planning to address that are two that are at the top of my list.
Well, as I indicated during our last meeting, and forgive me, I don't recall the exact date of that meeting, but I think that we talked about providing, there's actually documentation in your files which addresses each of those issues, and the access to the Red Cross was one of them, to where we would provide an access easement without restriction. With regard to sewer easements, there are sewer easements that exist, and we will stay away from the sewer easements. I think that what we've provided is a plan which essentially comes back off the sewer easements, or our buildings come off the sewer easements. And again, given the foundation system that we could apply to this project, we wouldn't have any impact on the lines within the sewer easements. I know that there was some discussion at some point about developing easements that were 50 or 60 feet wide. That would be most unusual. I mean, I'm used to secondary roads being 50 and 60 feet wide and right-of-way, but I've not seen an easement, I apologize, that's 60 feet wide. I don't think it's necessary. I think that the one thing that needs to be a concern that should be addressed should be, will the loads of any buildings that we apply work in concert with the location of the utility within that easement. Effectively, if I have an easement that's 20 feet wide and I have a sewer that's 10 feet deep, I would not impact that sewer in any way if I built even right up to the easement, especially if I modified the structural system of the building. If I applied pilings or caissons where I would take my building loads below the level of the sewer, there wouldn't be any impact whatsoever on the sewer. Those evaluations haven't been completed, but again, the sewer easements are of record. They are of record and they exist today, and we will continue to work within the parameters of those sewer easements as they exist. There are no encroachments whatsoever within the existing sewer easements.
We might clarify that perhaps the 60 came out of the report from our own workers who said it wasn't ours. So
Yeah.
once we get the results of your boring information, we'll send it back to them and find out if there's any change in that. That's
Yes.
fundamentally
Yeah, and
that's where it came from, not from us.
And we agree in principle as to what the reason. Again, yeah, you reported what workmen in the field may have said rather than what structural engineers, and I appreciate that, but all that given that reason that, we will consider the structure and the loading and where we distribute those loads, that's most critical. If we distribute the loads effectively below the sewer line, there wouldn't be any impact of the loads laterally to the sewers.
I think some of their comments were with regards especially to work easements. If they needed
Right.
to work on the lines at a certain depth, would the buildings be too close? But again, we're not here to discuss that. I think people are just reminding you of points that they are concerned about.
Right.
Anybody over here? Dave?
This is an issue that I have heard referenced sort of in the conversation, but I think people are, despite the quarter-inch calculation, I think people are still concerned about displacement and displacement of water in a flood event. So it would be my suggestion that we take the fill out of the documented area of the 100-year. That doesn't necessarily mean the site, because I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense, given the way the site's configured, but I would imagine that the floodplain itself is vast enough that the fill that you need to get could be retrieved out of the plane, out of the floodplain, and so we're not talking about not fill that would have already been taken out anyway. But you see where I'm going with this?
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
sort of a net no displacement?
Right. The
Okay.
displacement is a function of some projections. The projections were based on some fairly, we talked about just a moment ago about the drainage plan. And there is some analysis that's already been completed which addresses, roughly where would the finished floor elevation of this be.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't do complete modeling to show how the site drains. We know that if we have our finished floor elevation at a given level, and the site is at an average of what it is, we know that it will work. But a detailed grading and drainage plan
Yeah.
will have to be produced.
Yeah.
So the modeling was based on the amount of fill to raise the building, not 2 feet. By the way, we have to be mindful that we had agreed to take the building, rather than 1 foot out of the floodplain, 2 feet. So we've
Right.
added some impact soils which affect our increased elevation that contribute to that quarter inch of water,
Yes.
if you will. So I agree with you. I think it's worth analysis to see if there is a possibility to reduce that to a net zero. I don't think that I'd want to take the building back to 1 foot. I'm very comfortable with the building being at 2 feet above floodplain, as we all agree.
Right, right.
Excuse me.
Well, I hope you're able to do that, and I think if we consider the floodplain in a very, it's been mapped relatively authoritatively, so we kind of know where it is, and it extends outside the city. I mean, so I guess I'm just talking about the net displacement and thinking of the floodplain in a very sort of large way, not just localized. That's all. I think I made my point.
Yeah, I think, if you don't mind, maybe Josh can add to it, if you would.
It's
It's
up to the chair. I'm satisfied that I've communicated to you. I
Thank you.
didn't think we wanted to get into it right now.
Okay. And with that in mind, are there audience members who feel they need to speak tonight? Or, again, we will be having a more open discussion soon. Our task from here is to discuss among ourselves, not tonight, but in the future, is to discuss among ourselves what issues are most important, in some way come to develop a proposed ordinance that then would go through 3 readings of more discussion, possibly amendments, eventually leading to a vote on this question. But I see that as still quite a process to go through. And we will have a much more open discussion within a couple weeks, I think. Yes, if you have something to say, please come to the microphone.
I just want to make sure that the.
Yeah, please, you really need to do that, so people, we can't hear you without the microphone.
I just request,
Your name and address.
Chris Fall, and I live on Morris Avenue. I request that all the reports that have been produced with the soil boring and the HEC model be in the library, along with all updated maps and plans, because the plans have not been updated since March or February. So I want, so that everybody can look at it, including the CD, please.
In the public, they'll certainly be available here, but I
No,
think we can arrange to have it at
We
the
need
at
in the library,
library.
because this is hard to
Okay.
get to for people who.
Okay. Thank you, good point, thank you. Okay, again, thank you, gentlemen, for addressing these issues. I will be in touch shortly to schedule our next meeting.
Not to belabor the point, but the last set of documents, which are of record, are dated June, I believe. It's mid-June, not February or March.
I think she's saying that the newest ones in the library are actually February, so.
Oh, well,
So that, in other words, June's not there, I think. is what
Yeah,
she's saying.
well, but June is here.
Well,
Okay.
June is
Found
past.
people using GIS and-
We'll correct that.
All right, thank you.
And I would, yes, I'd like to see some of that data. I'll
Okay.
think about electronic and papers. Thank you.
So who did you see?
I suspect that several of you came for this discussion. We're going to move on very quickly to discussion of a lot split on Glen Drive. If you want to leave, give us a minute here to, no, I'm talking to Mr. Moritz there.
Thank you. I'll make you a copy of this unless you want to make me a copy.
Sounds like a good idea. Who's the, your engineer guy right there? Okay, can I ask you a question? Camera?
On this
Ask
Moritz
him who,
thing,
which of our
she give
students
you
he's got.
what?
Nancy will burn a copy of the CD.
First of all, Nancy wants to know which student did
She
work.
was going to make some copies. I don't know how much she made.
Okay.
Okay, the other thing, what, HEC-RAS, does that do
Okay.
flow? Or
You
does
got
it just do?
a picture?
I believe the mayor must have some, don't you think? Ask him. Do you have, Rick? Ask him if he has one.
I was, one of the concerns I have
Rick.
with people is that you're gonna
Rick.
have this hill.
Do you
up
have
at
one
the
of these?
top. You know, here's your built-up area here. Here's the river going this way.
remember
Now,
seeing-
the river floods. You've got this 2 feet above elevation.
Yeah.
The east side, Morris Avenue is below. Does this create a crest right here where it's gonna go this way?
Okay, we're about to move on to our next topic here, thank you.
I just wanted to model it. Okay. I think your crowd speaks. Thanks.
We have
They may go back without you, and you'll be sorry.
a recommendation from the Athens City Planning Commission. We're in receipt of a recommendation from the Athens City Planning Commission to approve a lot split on Glen Drive, which is a private road off of the Far Hills, Fullview Heights. I'm sorry, I always get Fullview Heights subdivision at the corner of Route 50 and Radford Road. This has been discussed at the Regional Planning Commission and the City Planning Commission, and now it's come to us for discussion and approval through an ordinance. The person requesting this is Mr. Moritz, and I'm going to have him come up. Members have received a small packet and a not very clear picture of the site in question, so we'll let Mr. Moritz speak for a couple minutes, and then we'll
You have to fill the time.
ask questions.
Here we go.
This is the whole packet.
More than one. Here, 2, 1.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, City Council. My wife and I are requesting a lot split of our property, which is located at 5686 Glen Drive in Alexander Township in the subdivision of Fullview Heights. Our property is within the 3 miles limit of the city of Athens, therefore, that's why I'm here. The property is located on the public right-of-way easement known as Glen Drive. It consists of 7.5 acres in our private residence. Over the last 15 years, a portion of our property, 2.5 acres approximately, has functioned as a second residence. The 2.5 acre portion has all of the utilities installed, including septic, water, gas, phone, and electric. This section is also addressed by the U.S. Postal Service as 5690 Glen Drive. Recently, the mobile home located there was removed. It was my mother's residence for the last 15 years. And at this time, it's our intent to divide our property and sell the primary residence with 5 acres, more or less, and if possible, build a home on the remaining 2.5 acres. We have to date obtained a positive vote by the Athens County Planning Commission, the Athens City Planning Commission, and the Athens County Health Department. In this packet that I handed you, it goes through those different public entities, and within the verbiage of that documentation, it spells out the motion passed in the different groups. We've also met the stipulations requested by these entities. One being a road maintenance agreement must be in place and signed by the residents of Glen Drive, and we now have that. The maintenance agreement must also have language stating that within the described 50-foot easement, further public utilities will be allowed, and we've gotten that. The residents of Glen Drive must also approve of my plan to split my lot and understand that there will be no further splits off from this private road. It's actually a public road, but it's not a public road that's maintained by any government, the township or the county or the city of Athens doesn't maintain this property. Therefore, that's why we needed the road maintenance agreement, and like I said, we have that. And lastly, we also needed the health department's approval. With the health department, they did approve the lot split based on us upgrading one of the septic systems. And within this packet, I've got 2 separate estimates for having that upgrade done, at which time it's not done at this time. I was directed not to do that by Bob Eichenberg yet. He said not to go ahead and put the money into it until I got an affirmative vote. So that's basically what I have. We would like to split our property and sell our private residence we live in now and build a new home. The impact to Glen Drive would not be any more of an impact than what we have experienced over the last 15 years. No increase in traffic on the road, and the continual maintenance and upkeep by the residents, which hasn't been a problem for the entire time that we've lived there. And now with the road maintenance agreement that's been signed by all the residents, they're fully aware that it is our responsibility to maintain the road, and they have no problem in doing so.
Okay, thank you. Council members, questions? Paul?
So the right-of-way is Glen Road is, Glen Drive is 50 feet wide, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. And how long is it?
Oh, Glen Drive, it's probably,
Okay, I'm looking at this map here. Is this where it comes off like that? It says public access.
If I could,
This is a little bit lighter map than you gave us, but
yeah, Glen Drive comes from right here. This
Okay.
is Fullview Heights Road.
Okay.
Down and around this turn, and then follows the property line right up through here, and it actually is encompassed by this 50-foot easement.
okay.
And it joins back up. It's actually, has access to Fullview Heights Road on both ends.
Okay.
But is that other end actually developed?
No, it's not. It was at one time, but it's degraded. My intent would also be, because that would be part of the property that we would retain, part of the 2.5 acres, and our intent would be to upgrade that road to a very passable condition. It was determined by all of the residents that they really didn't want to go public with the road. They have their reasons, but they would really rather not go public with the road. There's some questions about rental properties and different things like that, all of the residents would just as soon it stay private.
But you crossed out private and put public in, so
Yeah,
that means that we could drive out and
Oh,
look
yeah,
at this lot?
yeah. Private meaning not maintained by the,
Yeah, I understand the difference, I thought, yeah. Other comments or
I
questions?
just have one quick question. Would this be permitted by the Fullview Heights subdivision? I mean, do you have any deed restrictions in your, that would prohibit this split?
No.
Okay,
Fullview Heights is a fairly older
yeah.
subdivision, and I don't believe that at that time there were very many restrictions involved in doing subdivisions back then.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Anybody else? I had a couple questions about the maintenance agreement. They were saying that it needed to say that there will be no future lot splits allowed off of here. I don't see that language. Maybe-
That ended up being in the split agreement,
Okay.
and
Oh, okay, I see.
it's actually the very last sentence in the split agreement. It simply states, also, according to the Athens County Planning Commission, this would be the final lot split allowable on Glen Drive until such time as it becomes a publicly
I just didn't go
maintained
far.
road.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
And there are only like 3 signatures here, is that all the property owners, or is this still a work in progress?
No, it's completed. There's 3 signatures on this one, and the following sheet is a faxed. The property owner doesn't live here, and I had to fax this to him, and he signed it and faxed it back. And at the time that I faxed that to him, there was already the first signature on it, so
Okay.
just the second signature
Okay.
is the one that counts. And it's the same thing with
With the other one.
with the maintenance agreement.
I couldn't read any of them.
The signatures?
Yeah. Must mean they're legal.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Audience, have anything to say? Committee members, council members, shall we go ahead with that?
Let's go.
Okay, what we'll do is have an ordinance prepared, and we'll read it for the first reading a week from today. And then there will be 3 readings, basically 2 weeks apart.
Okay,
But we'll begin next Monday.
okay.
And if you want to come then to answer any other questions that might have come up, that's probably a good idea.
Okay. And this has been a learning experience for me over the past several months. I've learned a lot about county and city government, and it's very interesting. So I guess my question now would be, because I just don't know a lot about where things go from here. I don't do this all the time. So from here, we'll read it at 3 city council meetings,
Yes.
and then it'll be voted on?
And then it'll be voted on, and if we vote to approve it, then it is done. That's
Okay.
the end of it.
30 days later.
At least from our side, I mean, essentially, you were going to have to technically split the lots, right? I mean,
Yeah,
officially.
then he begins the work and he can
The septic
repair
system
the
in.
septic system and do all that.
Is there, after the vote, and if it's an affirmative vote, is there a 30-day waiting period?
Yes, there would be.
Okay. Okay, and at the end of the 30-day waiting period, would I be notified that whether there had been any referendums or not?
We could make a note that the clerk would do that. Once it's voted on, I don't see that there would be any other changes, but we can certainly do that. We'll follow that up and make sure the clerk lets you know. Yes.
Do you have a time concern with trying to get work done on the septic system or anything in particular? Because that might be a health and safety issue.
We could make
We could make it, we could,
an emergency clause which would remove the 30-day waiting period.
That would be fine with me.
Okay.
I do have a time concern
Okay.
Yeah.
involved here.
Okay, that, yeah. Councilmember Phillips makes, that is a health issue, so, from the health department, so, okay. That's, when we draft an ordinance, there'll be that emergency clause, which simply removes the 30-day waiting period.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next item on the agenda, who knows what it is water line expansion on Peach Ridge.
Okay.
Councilmember Bain.
Just as we have a procedure for subordination of leases, we have a procedure for water taps. And we have requirements that are spelled out in earlier ordinances. And a woman named Karen Bald on Peach Ridge, on a lot that's between the Patton and the Ball lot, is requesting water service. A bit of history on this would be that at one point, we did serve that Sunday Creek with water, so the line goes on the street in front of the house. We are not in competition with Sunday Creek at that point. I think we've kind of divided the territory. You might think that we should encourage them to annex into the city, but the sewer is a problem on that side of the road. It may happen eventually. So what we ask is that the administration take a look and send out the people who have the expertise, the people in this, did the test on the line, and they found that it will not degrade the service on the property line. And so I can say, having the recommendation of Ray Hazlett from August 29th, that we would grant this tap because there is no other option for these people other than possibly a cistern. And that's not a reasonable option at this point, especially not this year. So if there are no objections, I would like to put up an ordinance for Karen Bald for a water tap on Peach Ridge.
Nancy?
Yep.
So the other water system doesn't exist there anymore, is that what you're saying?
No, we have the line that goes through the road.
We took the line
does-
over.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the line that goes, there's like a, it was a transition that happened some years ago, maybe 20.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And did you say that the people on both sides ever have city water?
Oh, yes, all along that road, yes,
It's very
absolutely.
similar to the one we did on Old Coach.
Yes,
about a year
very,
ago.
very similar to Old Coach. Yeah, we actually will not expand except if they meet these characteristics, and the administration spoken with Ray Hazlett speaking for them, recommended this, that we approve this. Anybody have any problems with it? Okay, there'll be an ordinance up on next Monday. Second thing on my agenda is a continuation of the city plan. After we had our city plan meeting, citizens continued to meet together. I guess reflecting the reality that Athens is certainly an unusual place. Well, not only did we have 8 times as many people out for our meetings, but we also have citizens that are interested enough that they continue to meet. There's the transit group, the bicycle people, and now we have the open space people. So, a couple weeks ago, maybe a week ago, just before school started, I met with them and I listened to what they had to say, and now I'm going to let them speak and talk about what their concerns are. He can hand some more paper. I actually gave them a copy of it. Thanks. Introduce yourself, give your name and address, please.
My name is Milt Greek. I live at 17 Hanlon Avenue. I'm part of a group of citizens that formed after the last public meeting for the Athens Comprehensive Plan back in November of last year, I believe. And we are looking into ways that we can help implement the plan, especially as it pertains to open space, green space, and environmental protection for the riverways and view spaces, things like that. We've been meeting and we're continuing to meet. And one of the things that happened was that we came to understand that recently there's been some difficulties with the definition of open space as it presently exists. And we thought that we would try a crack at to see if there was any way that we could help with that. What you have in this handout is the cover page is introduction to who we are and the listing of the pages. The first page after the cover page explains what the current code changes, what needs are for the changes, we understand it, the proposed definition, and suggested changes. The attachment A that follows page 1 is a change of the open space plan, and page 2 is the rationale that we have for these changes based on our understanding of the comprehensive plan goals. The open space question becomes quite technical in places about permeability and how you define permeability, and we have some discussion there. I regret that we don't have some information here that you can contact us if you have some further questions about what we meant by some of these statements. But in any case, you could either email me through greek@ohio.edu or contact Nancy Bain or Paul Weil, and they can connect you with us. We don't mean to write code for you. We simply want to offer this for your review to see if maybe it will help with things. And if that is the case, then we appreciate our ability to be of aid to the city.
Thank you. I'm struck by your remark about writing code for us. It strikes me that we've not been very good at it when we tried it, so any help we can get. I'm thinking about housing code things and all that stuff.
Yes.
Every once in a while we're good, but sometimes we're not so good, so.
Well, it's a difficult
Thanks.
job. Thank you.
And code arises from the concerns and needs of the citizens, so, I mean, that's great that you come with us and with suggestions, too, so.
Well, hopefully they'll be worthwhile.
So the process would be that if we would decide to send this after people have a chance to read and absorb it, we'd send it to the Planning Commission
Okay.
at that point, wouldn't we? That would be our procedure. So we can't promise you Thanksgiving, I don't think.
Sure.
So it'd be a resolution to,
Just if we decide to
Change, yeah.
ask them to consider it.
okay.
You
you plan-
want to read it, or we'll read it and then decide at the next
Yeah.
meeting?
Yeah,
I'd like to take-
please.
Okay, well, it's your committee meeting now. Okay.
Do you plan to?
Who's in charge?
I would
Sorry.
just add that when I brought forth the proposal of rezoning the floodway as open space, the Planning Commission did have a rather extensive discussion of open space definitions. And I have some other documents, a memo that was from Wayne Key about some definitions, and also some stuff from Bob Eichenberg when I was initially talking about that. And I'd be happy to make copies of this information also to toss into the hopper. You can just see what the Planning Commission has already talked about.
So in a couple of weeks, we will have the meeting after people have had a chance to digest all of this, and we'll
That's great.
notify you, Milt.
Okay,
So you can come
thank
back
you.
if you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you
very
for,
much.
thanks for the citizen input, we appreciate that.
Have a nice night.
Thank you. One more issue for Councilmember Bain, solid waste plan with regards to composting.
Okay. Actually, we can start by saying, right now, we have not only citizen action on open space and bicycles, but we also have a very active citizen group participating in what we will call grassroots, no pun intended, compost work. And the person involved in that is Jim Sands. But I'm here more on the technical basis. Because the solid waste district sent forth a plan without the composting element in it. And the EPA said, we don't think that's a clerical error. We think that's a fatal flaw. So since we've already passed it, they would like to have us, the solid waste district will be meeting on Friday. I believe both, the planning committee, both Ray and I will be at the meeting. We'll pass it and send it back, but we have a timeline which will require it be up for reading, the revised plan with the composting in it, and both the composting in it, and we'll have to pass it under suspension to meet the timeline.
So you think you actually have that by next Monday?
Yes. Okay. So that's basically the structure. It's a very big oops, but anyway, we were so concerned about 90% in recycling. I actually wasn't there for that meeting.
Of course.
Never would have happened. Yeah, right. Anyway, that's my, so if there are any issues on that, I'll try and get it back to you on Monday so you can have a chance to read it, speed read it before council.
The composting group arose from a small group from AceNet Community Food Initiatives who began a small demonstration composting project and began to see that it really needed to be expanded to see if it was feasible. And so we've been looking at how we can involve Athens City, maybe other villages, cities, and the county, as well as CFI and other groups. And this would certainly give quite a boost to that effort if it were a recognized component of the district solid waste plan.
And you've been working at it quite a long time, haven't you?
Oh, it's been over a year, probably 18 months.
And it's really, I think, part of, again, the flavor of the place that recycling is what it is today because of citizens who initiated the activity way before it was in vogue. And we, I guess, sustain it even afterwards. But and it would have been Ed Newman and Tom O'Grady and Bob Eichenberg and Donna Goodman. People are still here doing the same thing, but they were the ones who started recycling. So now there'll be a new list of characters, but they're also
A lot of those characters are involved
in this as well. But it's the next frontier for us, and certainly something that we have to do. I mean, one of the issues for us is that we are quite advanced in our solid waste management, and we're part of a two-county system. And that, you can fill in the blanks in between that. And the other county is, sort of not quite up to the same, or not at the same point as we are, and that does create some issues once in a while. We do have some very interesting meetings, I can tell you that. Okay, before you, yeah.
Just to add to that, back to my sister project, so to speak, the hazardous waste collection plan, that's something that I'm still working with Ray Hazlett, looking into with a goal of next spring or summer having the first hazardous waste collection day in Athens. So that's still very much under discussion and looking at those possibilities and what the cost would be.
Yeah, just as by way of just supplementing that comment, I was reminded that both Licking and what's the other, Knox County are having that, and it's funded by the district. And so, just as the district gave money to Jim's group to do some seed money, our solid waste district gave money to subsidize it.
It was Licking and what else?
Licking and Knox counties.
Knox.
And so I think that the solid waste district might be persuaded, I mean, at least I hope, to, in some measure, participate in this.
Well, the suggestion or the discussion actually came out of the wellhead protection group, but it fits, in the greater plan in a lot of different areas, so.
So remember
I'll look
that,
into
and
that.
we'll,
Okay.
they also are collecting tires, which is certainly a need in this area. Charging, I think. Green glass? I think they do collect green glass.
No, they don't, they lay it on your lawn.
Yeah. I take mine up to Knox County myself. All right. So, and then my last comment has to do with, and I'm going to just sandwich it in miscellaneous before you get to your miscellaneous, Jim. One of my constituents, who will remain nameless, said to me, I would like you to bring up the idea of prohibiting bands with amplifiers in residential areas. And so this is somebody who has a legal background. The exact name will be nameless. Everybody had a, I guess I'm the only one that got the note. And he would like to have us consider that at some future point. I mean, bands are one thing, but marching bands don't use amplifiers. I can usually hear the 110. And, yeah, I can hear the 110. I suppose part of the problem is, and this would be somebody who lives up on the hill, that the noise does come up the valley, although I didn't hear it. Maybe I wasn't home. Okay. Anyway, so for future, you may see something, we'll at least talk about it. All right, I'm through.
We do have another miscellaneous, Councilmember.
Yeah, I put in your boxes Resolution R0495 and Resolution, I think it was R0795. These are assessments of Kenny Drive. Kenny Drive is fixed, as I say, in 95, actually close to 97, I think it was finally done. I put that in there because I think this is one way to actually finance fixing Jeff Hill. One of the cogent arguments I've been hearing all the time is that the university owns both sides of it, and therefore they would be the most to benefit from any improvement of it. So as another way to think outside the box, rather than vacate it and give it to them, is to assess them for any repairs we have to do to it. I put this forward because we could always use the money, we could fix it, and we don't have to give it to them this way. The process would be, we do a resolution, we would have, if they contest it, you have to have an assessment board. The code, I have yet to read all this part of the Ohio Revised Code of it, but we can assess property owners by the frontage, by percentage, and or by property value, I believe. And I think it's Ohio Revised Code 727 chapter. And I put it out there. I might just start working on it if you think it's necessary and
Comments,
useful.
questions? I think Jeff Hill will probably be back on our agenda in 2 weeks, committee meeting, so if you had some,
We have a committee meeting in 2 weeks, too.
excuse me?
Nothing, I was
Yeah.
just,
With regards to the issues that had arose last week, so be a good time to bring it
Okay.
up again. And then one quick miscellaneous, I'm going to ask the mayor to fill us in. I got an email from Steve Pearson, I don't know whether you all did, about Uptown Business Association promotion with banners, et cetera, on game days for businesses, which now discovered conflicts with some of our code issues. So there's been some discussion at the administration's level, I believe. You want to give us a brief overview of that?
Well, in the sign ordinance sections of the city code, there are restrictions on placing banners and flags and such outside of your building. You can do it in the display window without any problem, but placing outside technically is a violation of the city code. What the Uptown Business Association wanted to do was to, during the football season, have on displays outside on it. There is an exception in the code that allows for a special event type thing can be administratively given for it, but Steve's feeling was, since you're talking about not a one-time event such as homecoming, for example, you're talking about as many football Fridays as there is, he would feel more comfortable to either have, one, an input from council as to whether they felt that it was appropriate, or secondly, an actual change within the code itself, which would be more time constraints. from that standpoint. We did do, I granted to put flags where normally we have the American flag for this last Thursday, Friday game. In hindsight, that may have been a mistake, just from the standpoint that then spurred word to say, oh, well, the city's done that, we can put these things out, and so many more of them did. But from my way of thinking, I didn't really see a whole lot of problem with it either. But there were businesses that put flagpoles on top of their buildings, and, you know, the code is really kind of addressing height issues and obstructions, et cetera. But it opens somewhat a can of worms in a way that administratively we could probably make some rules to deal with it, but right now it's outside of our sign code that's there. And it just points out one of those things that code is very difficult, as we've already talked tonight, to write, to cover all situations. Yes, Paul?
This is in Title 23, so that would go through Planning Commission, right?
Right, but since there's the special event exemption that's there, and it gives the administration the right to do that, I would, at least without some degree of a committee discussion, saying that they would take this, you know, ask the Planning Commission to do it, or I can take it to the Planning Commission, but in the event for this year, do it that way, would be a little more forceful than just the administration going out there, and then that, in my mind, tends to then lead to further breaking of the code, because we've got a bit of that going on as it is, and if we would rigidly enforce the code in all cases, I mean, some of these different banners and things that come out periodically saying free lunch or free midnight breakfast, or a lot of these types of things that have kind of tended to creep along over the years, and all very well intended and good, but technically many of those are in violation. That you could do it, you know, up to a maximum of 3 times a year. The code reads about some of these, others it reads about for 90-day periods and only once a year. So there's a lot in the sign ordinance there that, are we really having a problem? Are we getting infringed on in little ways? And how much does code's really asking, and they're asking it through me, how rigid should I be in the enforcement of this? Should we be loose in it, or should we be follow the letter of the law?
And this would be mostly for football?
This is what's brought it to a head, but it does point out those other examples that I made. But there's nothing to stop the basketball coach from the athletic department to ask the same question in another season, too. And that's part of it, is where does it go? I mean, we have had the ability to have banners on our poles. We've done the Welcome to Athens for years. We put those over the Richland Avenue Bridge, and from time to time, people will ask for the 25th anniversary of the College of Medicine. Could we put those banners up, or for the 40th anniversary of the College of Fine Arts, or for football times, or athletic events? And so some of these things sort of grow because you loosen your rigid enforcement, I guess, of things. And say, well, that's appropriate, it makes common sense to do that, it doesn't really harm anything, and then gradually that happens. It's just like you have an ordinance out there on the books right now about tables and chairs on public sidewalks. And it's supposed to be only on Court Street, and the street has to be so wide, but then since that time, we've put tree pits in certain areas, so the street really isn't that wide. But more and more businesses, because they see it in a few places, they want to put it everywhere to give them extra seating too. And you get to a point where, at what point do you want to say enough is enough and go back, or do we want to review some of those overall ordinances? And what I'm suggesting is that if council wants to review a lot of those, because some of those, like the sign ordinance, would be go through a planning commission, some of the others might not, is that I could schedule a different committee meeting later on this year, Steve, to go through and say, these are the things that have crept in a little bit, like there's sideboards that people put out advertising the special and put it, it's okay if it's in your alcove, but if it's out on the city street, technically that's a violation. So we could have a real nice discussion with the business community and a lot of others about the overall issue that Steve is raising. And it's really one of permissiveness or not.
With the banners, the ones on the streetlights, do we put those up, or,
Yes, we do.
so we charge for them?
Well, all we put up is the Welcome to Athens banners and the ones in December and the holiday, and I think there's been a 4th of July banner back when we were doing more extensive 4th of July. Now, those are on the Richland Bridge. No, the university puts those up when they've
Those
done
are in
special
violation
events.
then?
Well, no, not really. I don't consider them to be in violation because it's a bracketed pole where we could display certain things. But the question, you fall back on other code things, and part of that is like the banners we do across Court Street. Okay? There are certain rules that are in there with respect to advertising. There's times because of a corporate sponsorship of an event, until it's up, we didn't even know that corporate logo was on there. Well, is that technically a violation of it because you've got the corporate logo in a smaller part being displayed there? You could interpret it that it would be. This can keep you busy for months.
Well, I guess I have a concern about if it becomes a very frequent occurrence. There was a problem 2 years ago with significantly oversized political banners that were hanging all over town, and code was, going around dealing with the size of different signs, and
That's a whole different issue.
it is, but I think if people get
It's winning
used
and
to
losing.
regularly hanging banners off of the front
Right.
of buildings and thinking that that's acceptable, I think it's
Right.
gonna
And
increase.
and to a very large degree, because of the changing of population, it keeps rotating through to that, they don't understand or know what those laws are. And so many times people are doing those not having any idea that there is or is not a law that covers that. Yes, Carol?
Would it be reasonable in the case of banners to suggest that it be a procedure like street closings or sidewalk sales where, there are official exceptions and they do come before council?
Yeah, that
To
could
be
be a
banned,
way
that might be
to do
one.
it. Yes, we used to do that with banners. Every banner went through city council until council got tired
January
about
would be a
20
great
years
time to
ago of
start
it.
that.
Delegated to administration.
I understand that, but the multiple banners for a big occasion sounds like a little bit different situation than every banner.
Yeah.
I can see, but, sorry, it wasn't on council when you were doing it.
It was terrible. It was trivial.
Nancy and I are the only ones that
It
remember.
was trivial and terrible, wasn't it?
The only thing, yeah, just one thing.
Go ahead.
The only thing I guess I could live with administrative discretion on the types of events where they're not one of a kind, but if they're in a series, and I can think of, if there were an art series, if there's a series of games that has a beginning and an end that's, you can kind of wrap your arms around, and it's not perpetual, like the perpetual garage sale or whatever thing like that. The other thing about the banners across is I think they serve a public good. And sometimes the only way that the entity gets the banner is that they accept the little things. I'm thinking, well, if it's the difference between communicating that information in that way or not, I'd rather opt towards communicating it and wink at the Pepsi sign or whatever it is, so. Anyway, I don't know if that helps, but you want to do that in a subsequent meeting?
Let's do it in
Oh,
January.
yeah, no, definitely a subsequent meeting, but I'm not
Until
I'm
then,
not sure
we
what the
can-
mayor is asking. Do you want a sense of council now, or you're comfortable with the
I'm
admin?
comfortable with the discussion. I think that since there has been a discussion with the Uptown Business Business Association and the administration about these issues, and they're asking us questions too, and we have to technically say, well, this is the way the law reads. There is a special exception clause, but we would feel comfortable at least having discussed that with city council for this year, and then if we feel there's a real problem and we need something to straighten out, then we'll go to council and try to do that.
I seem to hear council saying that maybe we don't have a real problem now, but we can see it expanding into something.
It
so
could get out of
that-
hand.
So that we would like to have that discussion, yes.
In January.
Okay.
Paul?
I lean kind of not in favor of it, but that's just my whole thing with signs. The important
Right.
signs get blocked out by the unimportant signs. And I know an event may be more important than a stop sign or a, walk light, but one will kill you and the other one won't.
Right.
So-
And I think we have to be cautious of that when we do those things.
Did you think we had enough football spirit this weekend? That we need more
I
banners?
think there was some positive football spirit, but I will remind you of those that were at least able to predict within the Athens Messenger, because I was the guest predictor. I was the only one that picked Ohio. There you go. Hey, you can be right sometimes.
He's riding the crest.
Thank you, Mayor.
What- Could I bring up one other thing? If we have that full-blown discussion, maybe the second Tuesday of next week or whenever it is, could we also
Second
talk
Tuesday.
about, and I've heard this from some of my friends who are in business, they feel that sometimes, and I'm not exactly in the same spot as Paul, but I do think that there's an unfair advantage in bannering that goes on our right-of-way when it's in the university area on Richland Avenue, for example, or when they put up a flashing sign for Ohio Valley Summer Theater or something like that, as they did a few years ago. And I heard specifically about that one. So I think the right-of-way is the right-of-way, and even if they want, even if, not they, but even if there is a request, it probably should go through the same procedures, because it's owned by this people, and I think they feel that if they put it up, they would have been put out of business right away. And,
Right.
and that was a while ago, but there's some other things like that that go on.
We'll,
So, yeah.
I'm making a list, we'll open this up and,
And Dale's enjoying this way too much.
yeah. Real quick, Paul, what were you going to say?
In terms of right-of-way use, one of the things I know that the bicycle group, the Spokes Council, I think there's our official title, would like to see more bike racks uptown and around businesses. They talk about how bad Kroger's is with theirs behind the house, the building, but there's very limited amount of space on the street, on Court Street, and they've been told that they can't put, and not that's enforced, again, they can't, lock their bikes to the parking meters or the trees, but we seem to have very few bike racks, and we have a lot of stuff that's cluttering up the sidewalks already, whether it's newsstands and I know garbage cans have their necessities and et cetera. But this would be
First
part of the
Amendment,
discussion I'd
First
like to hear.
Amendment.
Okay. It's on the list.
Aren't you?
Thank you.
Missed this?
What?
Any other miscellaneous?
Just wanna
Planning
tell
development,
Paul
I dare you.
We cannot change, I mean, last time we tried, we couldn't remove those boxes.
Oh, no,
First Amendment.
we've been through that.
Could put a bike rack on them, though.
Actually, there is
Like a
one chain to it right now.
combination.
The one
Oh,
in front of
okay.
Perks has been ripped out of the ground, the bike rack, but it's still there because it's attached to USA Today newspaper stand, so it's not moving.
Well, isn't that wonderful? First Amendment rights are protected.
Okay, Arts and Recreation Committee, Carol, it's you.
All right, I will try to be rapid. Here are some little handouts, 2-pagers. The two issues that I have, well, the first one concerns the fountain, and what I've passed to you is the financials on the fountain, which is a little mind-boggling. I saw this afternoon for the first time myself, and if you look at the bottom line of what has gone into the fountain in terms of value of works and the whole project, $102,798. The reason I come to you is because there is a request on the part of Rotary for council to consider picking up a couple of little items out of the total cost. We have spent $30,000 to date on the fountain. The two things that they are asking for, one is we requested that the fence be continued the whole length of the fountain. We have some of that fencing available, but only about a quarter of it. And the remainder of that fencing would cost $6,415. In addition to that, Rotary has asked if the city would consider putting in an additional $5,000. And when I look at this cost estimate sheet, a couple of things come to mind that really were add-ons after the fact. Somehow, it ended up being Rotary's responsibility in terms of the landscaping and sidewalk lights. Those, to me, seem like reasonable requests from the city instead. There is money in the TIF fund now that could cover that. Somewhere I have that. It's 593 is the TIF fund, and there's at present time 149,000 in there. And so I added these two amounts together, and I'm suggesting that council appropriate 11,500 additional dollars for the fountain.
Before we go further, could you clarify, there were also some in-kind city contributions, weren't there?
Right, there
And so
would be.
They're
not listed on.
They're not listed in there, so the true cost may be closer
Even
to
more.
150?
Right. I don't think Mike Knoll did these figures, and I don't think he had values for that in-kind city
They're
work.
invaluable.
Right.
They're priceless.
Priceless.
So are we talking about 6,400 more or 11,000?
We're talking 11,415, which would include all of the fencing, landscaping, sidewalks, or lights, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Dale, I'm
Dale.
sorry.
It was a fun deal.
Is the design and the scope of work set now? I mean,
Yes.
is this because it seems to
It did.
expanded, there was some sort of,
Yes.
I don't know what, mission creep or something that occurred here.
There were some changes along the way.
okay.
Part of that was recommended by the committee that was assigned for site specificity.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that went to the round design instead of the square, and that actually
Okay.
did end up being a costly choice.
Yeah.
It did end up adding about $5,000
Mhm.
to the cost of the design, because putting tiles on rounded surfaces
Mm-hmm.
is more difficult than putting tiles on square surfaces.
Makes sense.
I'd let-
Oh, whoop.
Just finally, I think if you want to leave the TIF funds alone, you could, I'd say just take it out of enhancement and split it between tourism and enhancement and call it a day. I mean, the TIF, we might want to just leave that alone, leave the TIF alone. And that's a modest enough,
Right.
comparatively, a modest enough sum that I think, looking at unappropriated balances, we could find a fund where the spirit of the fund is consistent with what we want to spend the money for, and not have to take it out of the TIF.
Okay. Paul?
So part of the change is also from making it square to round was also the brick sales. So how many more bricks would they have to sell to make up the difference here?
They
11,000?
already are anticipating more money. Actually, what Mike Knoll said in his letter to me was that the total increases that they had was $23,000, and they're asking if the city would consider covering 5 of that, and they're covering the rest from Rotary, including the brick sale. Debbie?
I guess it looks like some of the increase in costs are design decisions that were made after we approved spending money on this in the first place.
Right.
And a significant part of the increase in costs are the costs associated with selling bricks. So, I mean, it
Which
looks
is
like
their expense, right?
almost $15,000 of that
$15,000.
related to the bricks has gone, back out in the expense of dealing with the bricks. I'm more inclined to say, why don't we just do the fence? Do it in-house out of our budget, and let Rotary raise the rest of the money to do this, if the committee made design decisions that increased the cost of the project after it was approved.
Well, the only thing that I questioned, as I said, was that how they ended up being responsible for the landscaping and sidewalk lighting. that does not sound like part of the artistic enhancement of the fountain, which was the agreement to start with. So that's why I felt that the request is somewhat justified from that standpoint. Yes, I agree that a lot of their money that they've acquired for the bricks has gone back into the promotion of that program. But the brick thing will also continue, so they can recoup some of the expenses that they've put in. But that, I did go through and look at it and think, okay, what things did they not really set out agreeing to do? And those are the two. Sarah?
I'm fine with the landscaping and sidewalk planning. I feel that that could be construed as our responsibility, but did they commit to paying for the fence before?
Oh, no,
talked about
we
this?
asked for the fence. That was
Oh,
totally
'cause I was
our
under the impression
request,
that
and
they
it
said
was
they would
like,
pay.
the hope was that it would be included, or that we'd be able to cover it,
Yeah.
and that we would have enough fence.
I thought we
left over.
suggested it, and they said that they could cover it. I don't know.
Really?
That's the way I interpreted it.
That's what I remember.
That's what I remember.
That's what I remember, yeah.
It's a safety issue, I thought.
Yeah, definitely a safety issue.
Well, as is the sidewalk lighting, because in the evenings, we want people to be able to see where they're going. My memory was that Kevin said that he could cover the cost of the fence, but as it turned out, he couldn't.
Have them write a check. I thought tile installation was in kind, too. That was another thing that I was wondering about. I mean, it's a rather poor precedent, because I think that, I mean, there were all kinds of support and pressure for it, and now, I mean, it just seems like it's without even our in-kind. It's a very expensive fountain. And, well, it's still not done, I guess, but, so I don't know if it's worth it, but, I mean, it just seems that people make decisions and then expect us to bail them out. And I want to know if that's really such a great idea, because the next time it might be something some of us don't like as well as this one.
I just had a question about the fountain itself. Is there an expected date? that it will
Well,
finish?
our current expected date, after a long list of expected dates, but the tiles now are in the process of having the designs put on them. They came, they weren't right, they were sent back, they came again, they were finally approved, now they've been sent for the art work. They are expected back in October 1st, and then they anticipate being able to put them on fairly quickly. The hopeful anticipated grand unveiling is October 15th.
Two things. I am a strong supporter of the fountain, where it is, and I think it's going to be great. But I also agree with Nancy's concerns that, you know, we're sold an idea, and then we keep they come back and say, well, we're in the middle of this. You have to give us some more money, and talk about sign creeping on banner creep on Court Street. This is going to be a lot worse. So I do believe we're probably in this. We need to go forward with it. But I guess we need to be a lot more careful, because this budget is so far from what we were
Right.
presented
I would
with that
agree.
it's I mean, we couldn't operate a project with this much overrun. 10% sure wouldn't come close. The other thing is, I asked you quite a while ago, and you did respond, but could you respond publicly about I had some concerns about a warranty on some of this
Right.
work. Are we, what if it starts going bad pretty quickly?
There is an automatic warranty for the first year, if there's any
On the
structural. on the-
pump?
Well, and on the cement work as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. then, and I've been assured that there's just no reason for the cement work to fail. But if it failed, yeah, right. If it failed, that the first year is a reasonable guide for that. That's all I can offer.
Thank you.
Paul?
So the original cost was estimated at $55,000, was that it?
60, in that
Okay.
neighborhood.
And so now we're at almost, not double it, but slightly.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been selling bricks to make money to offset their cost. Have we been selling bricks to offset our cost?
No.
We gave them the bricks, though.
Okay. I think I voted against this first time, so, but I'm not on your committee, so.
Well, the question is, what amount would you consider putting forward, and we'll do it. Do we want to, the first question is, do we want to cover the cost of the fence, which is $6,415?
And I'm sorry, that was a question I was going to ask a long time ago. When you said the entire fence,
Right.
what's the entire fence encompass?
From the corner on,
The entry corner? Just like
Yes.
coming
yes,
on?
to the building.
Okay. So it'll be in front of the visitor center from the,
Is that your understanding? You don't know.
okay. Or is it just to cover the parking lot?
Keep the kids from
It
running in
could
the
be
street.
just the parking lot. Kevin said he had 1/4 the amount he needed.
So there's not enough to do anything?
Right.
Yeah.
So we could have a little piece.
Can we clarify that then, maybe?
But I can find out for you exactly what area will.
When we discussed it
Yeah.
before, I think the concern was that parking lot area be blocked off because it's just so tempting for kids
It's
to run out.
104 feet. I know
Yeah.
that.
But more is 6,000 going to give us more? Then, okay.
No.
Circular?
The approximate cost for the fence is $60 per foot. We need 104 feet, plus 175 for shipping. So that's in addition to the 25% he already has. So
Okay.
it's 130
I-
feet.
I would support what they're asking for.
Okay. So we can agree on, Debbie, how do you feel about the fence?
I guess I'd like to know which area we're talking about, because I don't think that we ever said that we had to fence the whole length of,
Okay.
from the traffic light down. So I'd like to see what exactly we're talking about.
100 feet is 2 small lots on Palmer, plus a half of one, that's not very much. Or a corner lot on Palmer, roughly. I mean, just in terms of,
But I certainly can ask that question and then bring this up again in 2 weeks.
And we've already got lights around the fountain that we paid for. And there are lights around the community center.
Okay.
So I guess I have a question about whether we actually need additional lights.
and I would like to know why the, I thought the tile installation was in kind, and I'd like somebody to clarify that, too. I thought it was over here.
Okay. I actually thought that as well.
Okay, so it's a lot of money.
Well, any other information that you would like me to get in terms of considering any additional funding other than the fence? Or are you just not wanting to fund anything beyond that?
Is there a sketch that exists with the landscape and the lighting and the fence?
No, but it's almost done, so you can go down and look at it.
And circular? Is there an actual picture of one circular?
No. Well, there is one, but it is not a true artist rendering. But everything's done except the tiles around the top. I believe it was seeded today, or if not today, it's going to be seeded this week. The landscaping is done. The sidewalks are in, the lighting is in. Well, I will find out any additional information I can, and we will address this again in 2 weeks. Okay, the other issue that I have concerns the NatureWorks grant, which we did get this time for the South Side Park bathrooms. And Kevin tells me that we need a $25,000 match, and the actual grant will be about $21,000. And so we need to appropriate all of that. So it's just under $50,000. There is just $51,000 in the recreation budget at the current time. But we will be reimbursed $21,000.
That's what I was going to ask you. It's a reimbursable
It
thing?
is a
Okay.
reimbursed situation.
Up to a maximum of 25,000 based on actual expenses? Is that how it works?
It says 21,000.
Oh, I mean 21?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, it's not one of those that might fall short of 21.
It lists
some
it
weird-
just straight up as 21.
Okay.
Is there any kind of question about that? It says we've been awarded a total of $20,800 in 2 NatureWorks grants for the new restroom facilities at the South Side Park. We would need a minimum of $25K to match. Can you discuss it in committee so that bidding can go out for spring construction? So that's where we would be at this point, is to allow the bidding process. So, committee members, Jim, Debbie, are you in favor of the match? Other council members? Okay. We can move that one forward then. And that, I have no miscellaneous. Anyone else? Thank you.
Okay, we'll start finance and personnel. There's several items on the agenda. And, thank you all for constructing this agenda for me while I was gone. I appreciate it. First item is the quarterly budget review. I think the mayor had distributed this item last time, and I guess the idea was that if people had questions or if you had some information to share about it, that would annotate it somewhat. Now would be the time.
I think the main thing that's the potential out of here is we did some changes to the income tax mix that affected the general fund, the recreation fund, and the street fund, and some of them positive, some of them negative, from the standpoint of they got more money or they got less. And we had carryover balances that were able to sustain that for a while in the hopes of the fund, the general collection of income tax getting better and being able to come back to a certain degree, and I'm thinking we're seeing that we can come back some, but that will be in the overall budget discussion that we will have in November. And most of the expense items that we budgeted, if you look at the attachments that we go out by fund and by object code, seem pretty well in line. We have a couple little areas that I'm going to have to watch, like gasoline. And we may be back to you late in the year for some supplemental appropriation, depending upon how the gasoline rates continue to go. But I was not in any particular concern about items. I think we're at 47.7% of budget in the general fund expenditures, and our revenue is running a little above where we had anticipated it to be. The other thing that I will probably be asking for in December is, we had this discussion, I think, a year and a half ago, was that one of the reasons when we changed the income tax mix, we put less into capital improvement by a significant amount, because one of the areas that the general fund gets in trouble was inheritance tax, because you never knew where it was, and the state government was talking about eliminating, et cetera. So what I had said at that time was I would change it by 2% or so. That was not the only change we made over the last few years to it, but that toward year end, when we knew what an inheritance tax was, we would transfer those funds into capital. That didn't mean much last year because we only got 30,000 or so of inheritance tax, but this year we're already up to about 180,000, so it starts to mean something again. And I think we have one more disbursement left to come in on that, or receipt rather, in that respect. That's all I have really on the quarterly report. I'll have one for you early in October, which will try to be a lot of our budgeting process for it. Yes, Nancy?
I printed out the revenue report, and because I was interested in the impact of the new billing system, and I can see it is, for example, could I attribute, if I were trying to explain it, the increase in late fees in the garbage fund to the improved billing, or to something else?
Well, they're still running concurrent systems. They aren't switching totally to the new system till October 1.
Okay.
So that's there. I think the other change that really is necessary in that same area is where we have red tag fees and reconnect fees. All that revenue is going into the water fund. And really, when you turn back on the water, you're also generating sewer billings. So, and it's primarily the same people, because it's the meter folks that are going out there and doing it. And we pay one through the sewer fund and one through the water fund. They both do them. And we really ought to split that revenue. It's not a whole lot of money, but it probably means $20,000, $25,000 difference between the two funds.
But there was
Just internal
some
transfer.
appreciable increase, at least, and I was especially concerned about solid waste, but I looked at sewer too, where there was,
I don't think it would be with regard to that. I don't have that report with me because it was the detail report to make up the other one. But I'll take a look at it.
but in the future, and,
Sure.
if you would like increase in late penalties or red tags or any of those, if you think, before the end of the year, if we should increase those as well as anything else that we're going to do. Because it's been a very long time since we've changed that. I don't know about changing the late fee, but some of those others, what's the true cost of putting a person out to turn it on? I don't think we're close to it in our charges. But anyway, it looks interesting. Thank you.
Other, Paul?
I seem to recall we were starting to bill up for the parking tickets. Has that seen any effect on that, or is that too
You'll
early?
see that in the report I just got. I got it about 3 o'clock this afternoon, the August report. And that was the first one that I saw. There was, I think, of almost 11 to 12% increase in parking ticket revenue in that month. And this was a slow month because of everything going out, so a lot of starting to see the back collections and such, because I think for the first time this year, parking ticket revenue is above what it was this time last year. Not by a whole lot, so that was a 1 month fairly dramatic change. We're going to have some expense with that, as you voted on at the last meeting, but I think we see the first hit of it in the August reports that I think were emailed out to people this afternoon.
Okay. Do you see, Rick, in the departments, do you see a kind of I'm trying to know how to say this. At this time of the year, usually you've got some savings, some budget savings of some sort because of salaries saved, unexpended, and that sort of thing, but we're pretty, we've kind of held positions open and maybe didn't budget for some of them. How do you see the managers sort of managing the funds? Are they pretty well behind their,
I think
where
when
you would
we're
expect
coming
them
in
to
at
be?
47.7% of what's budgeted for the
Right.
6-month level, and knowing that one of the major payroll costs is the longevity pay that we pay in December.
At the end of the year, yeah.
That I think, and overall, that means we're fairly well on target. That's not to say that if there's turnover right now in the code office. I did not budget very much for turnover there because I thought we had adequate time to get the new people there, but the first one retired August 31st, and so we've got now 12 days of savings.
Yeah, okay.
Because we don't have the next person hired hired yet, and
Right.
so we're going to have some of that, and we were right on target in the police department the first half of the year, because I had budgeted for 16 officers, and that was what we had. And then I budgeted half a year for one to get on board, and then a fourth of a year for the next one to get on board. Well, what's happened since then, neither one are on board yet, which was pretty well to projection, but we've had one disability retirement, one went into the military, and one transferred to another police department.
Yeah.
So I'm down 3.
Yeah.
And so that savings is going to be in the last half of the year, but more than likely, that's going to get made up because of overtime costs.
Sure, sure,
Because you have to maintain minimum staffing.
yeah.
In terms of the military, the street department, that also is reflected that way too?
It will start. Andy isn't off the payroll yet. He's on leave. I think he leaves, reports tomorrow, or maybe it was Monday. And then one of the things you'll see in next year's budget is that we will budget for 2 street directors for a minimum of 2 weeks, because under all of the different agreements, he has to be able to, payroll-wise, be back on the payroll for 2 weeks while he's gone on military leave.
Okay.
And that means I got to create another position.
Thank you.
Tricky.
What will be the impact of the policeman that was injured on Saturday night by his horse falling on him? Is he going to be out for the rest of the year?
Don't know yet, because his operation was yesterday. They put a plate into his wrist. It's multiple break. And until he responds to physical therapy as thing goes on, we don't know what percentage of use of his hand he's right-handed, and this is right hand, from a gripping standpoint and from other things. So there's the potential there that, we'll lose. I mean, it's always a possibility. I don't want to say that that's, I mean,
You don't know?
he's under just the first few days of medical care, and you just don't know what's going to happen, for sure.
Okay.
Anything else on this? Huh?
I have a question. On page 1 of the expense comparison, other funds, that's like the second to the last sheet, third to the last sheet. I was confused by the tourism fund under the 0504 differences. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, part of that was that in '04, I think, we were still wrapping up some things with the Habitat House. There were some other community agencies, because usually the tourism fund itself is really just putting the dollars in. Now, into the the automatic funds that get at the tourism fund itself, the Convention Tourism Bureau. Maybe a payment wasn't posted, but
But the problem
That's what
is,
the
the other
report said.
columns, they add up to the total.
I can check it.
And
What
this
what do you mean by
the,
the other columns add up to? the total?
okay, under the.
Oh, I don't have the total there?
Well, either you don't have the total or the total's wrong. That was my.
Well, I don't have the
question.
total there, and so therefore, it's a negative 39, because there's the line for the total is blank, so I just
Right.
need to go in Excel, change that.
Not where I'm looking,
Your tourism, June '05, total is
No.
blank.
the difference between
Right, but if you go back
Oh.
over to '05, it's
The
blank.
column underneath.
So you're subtracting
Underneath the
from 0,
57.
so obviously it isn't going to add up. I'll correct it.
Okay.
Good catch.
Okay, any other issues with this? Okay, thank you. If it's okay with you all, since Kathy is here to talk about tax changes, I was going to ask her to go next. Okay, so Kathy, you're up.
Where's the tax change?
Thank you, Dale.
Sure.
I think all of you got in your box a printout that I put in there just today. I don't know if you've had time to look at it. The first page is something that you've already seen. We've already talked about the changes. This is the list that we put out a year ago in our office. And on our previous discussion, we recommended making the changes 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so those are the ones we worked on. And what I've given to you, with Cindy Smith's help, are the actual changes that would go into our tax code, which is Title 15. I've received an electronic copy from the law director's office. And so we have written these up. And this is how it would be inserted into the code, to change the code. Then it would be put in an ordinance. If you are in agreement with these, then we will do that and then send it to the law director's office for final approval. And then, of course, you will see the ordinance in front of you. The next thing, I guess, would be to see if you have any questions about any of this. I can go over some of this quickly. We want to change the minimum collection or refund amount from $1 to $5. That would cut down on processing and refunds. 2, 3, and 4 actually have to do, most cities don't allow either one of these, actually. What we're trying to do is get in line with most of the cities' Ohio Revised Code and what other municipalities are doing from the recommendations of our auditors. Would like to see more uniformity in what people are doing. And so we would we want to change the years. And so these aren't total changes from our code. These are adjustments of amounts and timeframes, really. Same with 4. We are reducing the amount of activity that could go on. They're making an adjustment there. As I said, actually 2, 3, and 4 would all cut down on processing and refunds for the city. Number 5 would be just, we're not intending to wipe that out entirely, but we would like to reduce the amount of reciprocity to 1%. Lancaster just did this, Cleveland did this. Most cities do this, where they don't give full reciprocity. We've been doing that for quite a while. And so that way we would at least receive, instead of being a wash, like we are with Nelsonville, we would at least receive some tax income from people who work in the city, or live in the city and work somewhere else.
These are, just while y'all are thinking of your questions, these are a set of things that Kathy and I talked about back in November of 2004, and then we revisited this issue before the recess and kind of floated these trial balloons. There were 7 suggestions in all, and then when we asked for the auditor's recommendation of which of the 7 seemed most reasonable, these were the 4. And since some folks don't have this in front of them, the first one is increasing the amount that has to be there for a refund or a payment is $5. Then the net operating loss carry forward would be decreased from 5 years to 3 years, which means now you can carry the loss forward 5. We're going to say 3, and that's a consistency issue. The third one of these is disallowing the deduction to offset business losses from, currently it permits a taxpayer to offset business losses from self-employment income and rental activity against W-2 wages. The city would disallow this deduction. These business losses would be used against business income, but not personal income. So the business is treated as a business, personal is treated as personal. And then the last one is, the suggestion is that the maximum amount of the credit if a resident works in another city would be 1%. Right now, it's what?
It's the full 1.65%.
It's up to 1.65, and so we're saying the credit could max out at 1%. Those are the 4 changes that come to us from the auditor, and they're consistent with the ones we talked about earlier, and now it's time for questions.
And just a quick question, just to clarify, the operative dates are on or after January 1st, 2006, which means that you can still report these for your 2005 taxes, but not for money received January 1st, 2006. Is that correct?
Right. Right, yes.
Thank
This
you.
wouldn't take effect till January 1st. So for the rest of this year, you would still be reporting under our current code, which those returns wouldn't be due until April 15th. But for next year, we'd like to see these changes in place,
Okay.
right?
Other questions?
So the other ones we decided were not of interest of doing, I guess, or just too egregious, or?
Well, I think at least one of them I'd like to do down the line, but I think that these four that we're talking about are adjustments to what's in place. I'd sort of prefer to make gradual changes.
Okay.
The first one really wouldn't bring in very much money to try to implement that. Number 6, the mandatory filing would require manpower. And so that would be a huge change in our office. We're not opposed to trying any of these. As I said, these are all things that are being done all over Ohio by other municipalities, so.
I kind of wondered where we were with number 7, because in your initial projections, that's the one that would actually bring in significant revenue to the city. And I have kind of sketchy notes from the last time we talked about this. You had some pieces of Ohio Revised Code that you brought in with you, and I just wondered if there was a question of, you know, an individual with an office in the city who performs most of their work outside the city, and if anything else existed in Ohio Revised Code or in other cities of how they handle that.
Well, that's mixed, like I said. That's the way I think a lot of municipalities are going. A couple issues with that have to do with the makeup of our city. This would involve, these are people who work for an agency but don't live or work inside the city, actually. So if you live in Albany and you deliver for Pepsi-Cola, but you don't deliver inside the city, you neither live nor work here, but their office is in the city. This involves some county workers, a lot of county workers, and businesses like that. And it's really your call, but I think it's pretty controversial as far as that goes for people who don't live here, don't spend any time working in the city, just because the office that, manages them, it happens to be here. Which they pay local taxes for anybody who does work on-site, do with the withholding. But it's something to think about. We process quite a few refunds. for
My
people involved
recollection
in
of
those
the
situations.
discussion is that the income tax administrator felt like she needed to think about that one a little bit more,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that what y'all meant?
January.
That and the mandatory filing
And
would
mandatory
be major changes in our processing.
When Kathy and I discussed this earlier today, what we thought we'd do is just sort of let this sit for a couple of weeks, since it involves income tax, and since this is not going to have an immediate impact on collection until later. And since we brought it up in the summer, maybe people didn't have enough time to really consider it, so we'll just sort of let it hang out here for a little while and then come back and revisit it at a subsequent meeting and maybe think about getting this on the books before the end of the year. Kathy, do you have something else to bring up?
I do have a couple other things.
Okay.
One thing to add to that, if we do end up with a tax ordinance, if we do or not, we have some wording changes we'd like to make in our tax code, which really just bring it in line with, I didn't hand anything out on that, but I will. I just didn't want to confuse things too much tonight. But really, these are just changes. You all know that a lot of our code actually just parrots the ORC. And so these are changes that have been made, and it's wording and then lettering and things like that. And so I will hand that out also. And we thought that this might be a good time, if we do end up with a tax change ordinance, that we could just add that. And so I'll pass that out, and you can look over it, and if you have any questions about that later on. So that would involve our tax code changes. Possible ordinance, yes.
If somebody has any questions, do they address it to you or Dale, or, I mean, if we're
Oh,
gonna let
either
this
way.
sit
Well,
perk for a while.
probably my office, but
Okay.
Dale and I are in contact, but he hasn't seen any of that yet either. We just came up with that last week.
If I get a question I can't answer, I send it to the auditor.
There you go.
Okay.
That's what I do.
Okay, I have one other issue I'd like to bring up tonight. I haven't handed anything out about it. I have discussed it with a few council members, and I just kind of want to throw it out there because we've been kicking it around for a little while. Steve Pearson from the code office has been helping me with this, but it involves registration of home occupations and contractors. Right now, we only register plumbers and electricians. And registration is not licensing, but it would be a registration, a way for us to track people who are doing business in the city. Steve has really done most of the work on this so far, since his office, he's more familiar with these ordinances and codes that are out there. His office would be the one, in charge of registering people. But the reason I'm involved is I think that this would facilitate collection of income tax from people who are working in the city but not paying, that aren't obviously, if they work out of their home, it might still be their main revenue. They have, we see lots of business vehicles with names and phone numbers on the side and equipment going around town, but they're not on our tax rolls. And this might be a way for me to, track and get some increased tax for people who are working in the city. What we're recommending, just to give you an idea, would be to have one for home occupations, which I would like to put some information together and give you an idea of what could be involved in that, and a separate one for the contractors. And then that would go in our, probably in Title 11 of our code. But if that's okay, I'd like to give you some information, give you an idea of what other cities, I have a whole stack of things here. The state does it, other cities in Ohio, and cities all over the country. And there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but I'd like to see us implement that if possible. And of course, there would be fees involved that would be paid to our code office.
Questions, issues? Yes.
No, just a
please.
comment. Thank
Comments?
you for coming this far with that. We did discuss this in committee a year or so ago, and there was, I thought, support among most council members, but then we didn't really go anywhere with it. So
It just dropped, yeah. I don't remember it, or maybe, I don't know, was I on council? Last year I wasn't, but
You
but
were gonna
actually,
vote for it.
it did come up several years ago, and Chuck Miller, who just retired from the code office, found some old information where Gary Hunter had done some research for Nancy, and
That's where it ended.
Mhm.
so, like you said, I think it is an issue that's been out there that people are interested in and maybe supportive of, and so I'd like us to discuss it if possible.
Couple-
Last time there was wide support, but
Yeah.
but it got stopped at that level. So, maybe before you come to us, you might want us to talk to Gary.
Okay.
Not that, because he had some reasonable issues out there.
Well, I admit that the more information I get, and you all know how that is, the more confusing it gets. There are a lot of home occupations that we could include or not, and different ways of doing it, and I would recommend simplifying it, but that will really be up to Gary and you guys. So I'll put together information, and then we can discuss it.
There's a couple of other sort of issues. I really hadn't considered home occupations. I was thinking more about contracting type work where you really think you want to sort of have a minimum standard of protection for consumers and also for the people who work in that environment, like workers' compensation and bonding at a certain level, and then the tax, and there are the tax benefits. So I'm thinking that there could be some other outcomes, although you don't want to load it up with a bunch of stuff. But it would seem to me like
You're exactly
that
right.
would establish
Yeah.
some sort of minimum floor if you're going to do some particularly outdoor businesses or something like that, that there's some confidence that the person isn't going to, I don't know, chop a tree down and it falls on your house and run away and you're done, and there you are with a
Right.
tree on your house, and thinking,
You're
"Oh,
right.
now
That's
what
one
do I
of the
do?"
reasons that when we discussed this, so we talked about that, and
Yeah.
why Steve recommends separate code
Okay.
adjustments for contractors and home occupations.
All right.
And that's why, because as for our plumbers and electricians, we require workers' comp and bonding, and so yes, they would be handled separately. I think one of Steve's thoughts is the fact that with the computers so prevalent now, a lot of people are able to work out of their homes a lot more easily, and that's just one of the areas that could be covered in that. And there are other names for that home occupations. That's one Steve likes, and it covers quite a bit.
Okay.
So we'll present both of those. You might.
So that'll show up later, on a later.
Sounds like a good idea.
But not in, it's for not to implement this
Nope.
year.
No, not really. It's
It's going to put it in January, too,
it's
right?
information.
In January.
Hey, we can get a lot done before January. Okay, any other questions for Kathy?
Remember, Ed's got 5
Okay.
minutes left on his parking meter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, boy, it's a lengthy agenda y'all put together
Ed
for
wants-
me.
Ed doesn't want it to-
Street rehab fund.
Number two?
Let Ed,
Hey, we did,
can't you let Ed do a whole?
I don't know what he wants. Well, okay. We have to do it all anyway, so Ed, why are you here?
For Ohio.
For Ohio Avenue? Well, we're almost there, Ed.
Actually,
these
we're
two
there and we
different
jumped. So you're going to absolve him of his ticket if he gets one?
Yeah, I'll use all the influence I have,
Oh, good. Oh, we're in great shape now.
which is 0, so.
Okay, I wanted to do a summary of the street rehab fund because this is one of our few funds that is voted by the taxpayers for rehabilitation and restoration of streets. It was authorized, reauthorized really by the voters 2 years early so that we could do more on East State Street. And in 2001, so the first collection year started in 2002 and will go through the tax year 2011, which means it'll really, some of it get collected in 12 and maybe 13. So we're in the 4th year of collection, and we estimate that the new revenues coming in, and it'll vary a little bit because of interest earnings, will be somewhere in the $525,000 to $530,000 range, so I wrote down 527. Balance as of December 31st was $810,000. Since that time, I've made 6 requests of council to make commitments for that. Engineering of the Union and 682, $145,000. The Congress Union Signal for 25, which was in combination with our Community Block Development Grant funds. Issue 2, which I call middle school paving, which is High Street, Washington, and Lancaster, and some sidewalk work. The initial was $45,000. That did all the survey work, any geotech, and got it ready for bid. It's ready for bid, and we found out the state doesn't have their matching share yet, so it's going to be delayed till next year. And part of that project, because it's a $273,000 project with $203,000 from issue 2, we might then have a further commitment later on, although we hope to recoup most of that because sidewalk work we hope we'll be able to bill to the property owner. General street paving, we did $200,000. Engineering for sunset slips, $75,000, which would also include the geotech work for those. We put $35,000 toward the East State Street debt to round out what we were transferring from the East State Street fund, and now we have a local debt on East State Street of $2 million. And then we got into the Coventry, York, Penny Lane problem, which I asked for originally $190,000. We'll really use probably 172 of that. So the second sheet I gave you was the detail of this year's street paving projects, including Coventry. Originally, you had approved $450,000. By the end of it, through additional appropriations, you were at $648,000. Of that, our normal, what we had bid outside of Coventry, cost us $364,000. But Coventry itself, even though we switched over to our own personnel in many ways, we had a lot of contract services, cost $265,000. So we came up to a $629,000 totally spent. Now, what happened was, management-wise, when we made the original commitments of the $406,000, which was the original contract with Shelley and Sands, the way the POs were written, streets was written last. So they were the ones that were becoming the beneficiary of $44,000 of additional capital money that they hoped not to have to spend. And then when we came to you, and I didn't cross-check well enough, and we bought the leafer and the one-ton diesel, we spent that money, a portion of it. So when we come down here and say we still need $18,400 and some dollars, that means I can take everything we budgeted in capital for the street fund, but I'm $18,000 short of really having the money. So I need an additional $20,000 or something to be able to actually do it, and that's my fault. That wasn't council's. I didn't give you the right information because we went out of appropriated balances on those last two purchases, and we shouldn't have. Didn't check it close enough. So I tied both of those together a little bit. Also, I went through then and said, okay, after we've spent this $697,000 in road rehab, street rehab funds, of our original balance, we have about $113,000 left. We're coming in at about $525 to $530. And we have further commitments. The Pomeroy Road, we paid back in 2003 budget, I think we put $105,000 for engineering, geotech work, and all of that. ODOT agreed to expend up to $755,000 on the project. And they would reimburse us they wouldn't do us for the geotech and such, but they would do the engineering work of $45,000 or $48,000 as a project expense. The residents asked for some things, but when the engineering work and the final estimates got done, they were at $1.3 million. So, yeah, to do everything the engineers to put it in perfect shape, fix whatever potential slip areas there are and everything else. I was being asked, in essence, by engineers to come up with about $500,000, and I just said, we don't have it. So I'm still in the process of talking to ODOT to say, if you're turning this over to us, and this is a legitimate engineering thing that your engineers agree with, to put it into A1 condition, I think the state should increase its commitment to it. I've not gotten an acceptable answer to that yet, let's put it that way. But since we got $50,000 roughly coming back, we could put 50 more into the project. And as I mentioned earlier, the middle school paving, when we do that next spring, could take $25,000 up front from us, but I expect that to be reimbursed from property owners on sidewalks. Looking at the original engineering estimates, that it was approved by ODOT once again, for the Union 682 construction, and if we pay 20%, they pay 80%, the max is supposedly $170,000 more. We pay engineering 100%. We have 3 slips on Sunset. That money we spent on engineering and geotech says the estimate before final design is $600,000 to do all 3 slips, which we could pick off one at a time, and FEMA has said they would approve one of the slip repairs, and they've already sent us a check for $37,000. So that's a further drain. Our current issue 2 application, which is repaving Union Street from Shaker to Jefferson Street, which would add into what we did last year of Jefferson to Blue Line, would require a $60,000 match. That was just submitted Friday. We don't know if we'll get funded on that. And then if we do general street paving again at the same level, we tried to do it this year, $200,000. We see commitments in 2006 of $1.1 million. which, if you take the full years of collection and with our balance, yep, we have maybe $25,000. But it's real tight, and there's really timing issues, especially on the Sunset Slip and some other things. So a lot of this is just good background information so that you can understand what we've done and what planning we should be doing, and I'm paying particular attention to use the street rebuild fund to put a portion of it into the general repair of our streets. That's why I've been recommending $200,000 the last couple of years. But then where we can get grant money, use that funds to maximize the taxpayer's dollar and come in. Because some of these projects, I mean, just the union engineer, because if you divide 20% into 170,000, you come up with, ODOT's going to be putting in about $700,000 on that project, which would have wiped out all the other projects. So it's one that, since they have the money available, they would approve it. It became a priority because it was already, that's why we were asking them for it in the beginning, because that's a dangerous intersection without, widening it to 3 lanes. So that gives you just as much as I can in black and white for you to cogitate on where the street fund is, what my need is, and the street fund versus the street rehab fund for this year. And that's it. Yes, Carol?
I thought that the 682 Richland Avenue intersection was a total ODOT situation.
Oh, no. No, Richland 682, they would want a local share of a minimum of 20%. They're estimating that project, if they go the whole way over, and they're talking about putting everything in together and taking it to the state planning for funding in 2007 or 2008. And they're talking roughly $2.4 to $2.6 million. If they want 20% from us, we're talking maybe $400,000. But again, that's why I wanted to tell you the length of term. But I mean, this is monies that the taxpayers have voted on to improve their streets, and I don't mind. This is not something I want to accumulate a lot of. I did that for a while in order to get East State Street done because our local share of East State Street was $7+ million, and we've paid all of it off but $2 million. This doesn't reflect paying anything more off of the $2 million because the TIF, as it stands right now, and we get the 230-some thousand or so paid from capital that did the bike path and the fountain and the beginning landscape, all the landscaping on East State Street. That 150,000 can go to pay off that $2 million debt, and we just have to work out a fiduciary schedule to do that, decide whether or not we want to bond it or not. And the other thing with that is that I can't get from the county auditor's office exactly because they bill by continental properties. And so when I ask, well, did the Captain D's get in, is it in the space right now or is it getting added next year? It's not easy for them to look up, because that's some appraiser who is a consultant to them did, and it's in their work papers somewhere. Same thing with Hollywood Video, and they did all of the building that includes Staples and Radio Shack and all the others. And there's 5 more pieces of property, 5 more pieces of property that have not even begun construction or been sold yet. So my original projection of $203,000 per year, we're at about 74% of that right now. But this is only the second of 30 years of collections, so we have some time to do all those things. But I did want to give you an in-depth briefing of where we were, and I'll take some more questions if you got them.
Okay, I see the possible engineering of 682 is 2007. Is that far ahead, or?
Well, that's what ODOT has said. They would not have any funds available, even if they approved it in around this fall. At the earliest possible would be July 2007. And they, of course, always tell you, if you can put more money in, that'll strengthen your application in competition with any others. Well, I just don't have the money to do it with, so we didn't do that.
So what you need for next time is 20,000
The streets.
in
item.
streets?
In the streets cap, because
Yeah,
we need it appropriated only.
okay.
It's just an amendment to the appropriation ordinance.
cap.
That way I can legitimately pay from where I was authorized in street rehab and streets Because where I'm short, it's not street rehab, but
It's in streets capital.
capital.
Okay. We'll do that next time. One more, sure.
So, question here, so when you say streets capital, you're talking about 220 and some section within that? Or are you talking about street rehab?
Out of
Which fund?
street rehab for what I call, you're talking, assuming you're meaning the general paving, like if we do Second Street.
Well, he just said street cap, and I was just wondering.
Well, street cap is a combination of
It's the object code.
the
of
road
street.
rebuild projects and the replacement of equipment,
Okay,
like snow plows.
okay.
We can bring this, we can take another look at this at another meeting if you like, because this is a good planning document for budget preparation for next year.
The $600,000 is a bit frightening. Is there any other source of it we could use with that? The 600,000 on the slips on a relatively, on Sunset?
Well, I think that the major one and the one that FEMA approved was the middle one, and that's going to be the highest
first one?
priced one.
Okay. It's just that's.
If we had the money to do them all at once and you got one bidder and did them all, you'd save some degree of mobilization cost. But the big problem is the middle slip. And it's probably the most expensive, and I'll be meeting more with the engineer in the coming weeks as to, and giving them some direction. So any comments you may have of, we should do this in 2006, I need to know, but we got to look at the timing aspects, because middle school paving, we know should be able to happen in June of next year. If we get the other issue too, to do Union Street from Schaefer to Blue Line, or to Jefferson, we should bid those as package to save that mobilization cost. So I've got that coming out. And then we'd have to look at what point in time, because if we're doing the general street paving, I mean, we will have, I'm anticipating right now, a balance in that fund of like $15,000. So we know we can spend all of that. It's then, how does the next $500,000 come in over the course of the year? And that's where we get together from the standpoint of my administratively making some recommendations and you making the decisions.
That's good.
And we're,
Okay, one more.
Well, actually, two more probably, but
Well,
state highway and the wheel tax, where does that fall in? I think we use that money for a rebuild project as well.
well, no, I've been using it for the general, I used all of the balance as of the beginning of East State Street for the East State Street project. From that point on, I've been using $100,000 a year with your approval for the general street rebuild. That's where I put 200 originally from here, 100 from there, and 150 from the general street fund cap. That's how I got to the 450,000.
Okay.
So I would still say if we can still do 200 here and do about 100,000 out of that and some amount out of the general streets, we still should be able to have a $300,000 or so project. And if we were able to do Union Street by putting up 60,000, which is 30%, that actually adds another, I think, 140,000 to it of actual road things. So we would hit another year that we're spending over $400,000 on the streets, and that's not counting what we're going to do at Union 682, which is an $800,000, $900,000 project. So we're doing an awful lot of road construction work, and the ability to do that is because of this tax, as a designated tax, because it's spending off a reasonable amount of money, and we're slowly getting all of these problems that we've had. I mean, but we're knocking them off. That if I get to Union 682, if we get Richland 682, we've already got East State Street solved. Stimson isn't in terrible shape, and Columbus Road is relatively decent too. Our main arteries in town are going to be in pretty good shape. So, at that point, but still I want to spend at least 200 or plus thousand per year on the non-collector, non-arterial streets, the residential streets. As you saw, I mean, when you look at the list of what we did this year, that we did, Pine Street and Ring Street are not major thoroughfares, but they are ones that we have been ignoring for a number of years and finally got to a condition, and we had the ability to do them. Same thing as the work we did on Columbia and Cape. Richland isn't in bad shape, we've cut and patched our way over a multiple year, and that's what we're doing on Union Street. We did a section this year, we'll do a section next year, et cetera.
And I think it's
And we'll get it all
Mound,
done.
Mound Street, not Mount, is that what I'm reading right there? Is there a Mount? There's
No, that's
Mount.
Mound Street.
Okay. Another question, I'm looking at all this stuff, and I want to encumber some money for Ohio Avenue sidewalk.
Well, I think that's the street fund, because I think that I'd have to look up the language of the street rehab fund, but did it include sidewalks?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't think it normally would.
Okay.
But I have an estimate for you.
You do, good.
I do. It's staked.
Are we going to move then right into this next
Sure,
agenda item?
Well,
Good.
I went ahead and had an estimate made. It was made late June,
Okay.
so we'd have to cross-check it. But it was for 690 feet of sidewalk that would be 5 feet wide, 4 inches deep, inch of gravel, or 4 inches of gravel underneath that, with 7 driveways, that would be 6 inches thick. Okay, and I'm assuming the handicap in there, and then reseed and mulch, and the price at that time was $20,144.
20,000?
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking at the summary from 2002, and they had 32,000.
Right. It's a good
It's a
price.
bargain, let's go for it.
But again, it's one you authorized, but there's no appropriation for it. So if you were to do this 20, you have to look at, do you want to do about another 22 to do Ohio Avenue? And we can get it done this fall.
Good. I think we want to get it done.
But you have 160,000
What do you mean?
unappropriated balance in the
street.
street fund.
Oh,
In
okay,
the
yeah.
It can be done on
Okay.
a street. There's
So
the
you can
dollars.
get it out of there, but that's,
We're spending it down.
Yeah.
Do it.
Do
Yeah.
we have any enhancement money?
I would prefer to do it.
There is enhancement money, but there is street money too.
Right.
Which street money can be used for a narrower set of things than enhancement. So I mean, if we're going to do this, I'd rather do streets. That would leave enhancement for the things that, if we need them.
Okay, so
I
if we
see head
segued
nodding all the way
into,
around here.
if we segued into the Ohio Avenue
Yeah.
thing, that would come out of, and the total amount would be, you said 20?
I say 22, just that way he has about a 10% with it.
Got your
with the
contingency money.
Because it's
Okay.
20,144. So if we do 22, even if I have a change order come out because we run into a water line or something happens that we didn't anticipate, we at least got some money to deal with it without having to come back to you.
Okay.
And if we don't spend it, that just means it's going to be there in the balance for the next year.
22 out of street.
Right, because this
Okay.
is one that if you go ahead and pass it, because it's under 25, in my opinion, we can just, since we have quotes, we don't have to go to bids, we just award it and go.
Okay.
Okay,
Just schedule.
a quick question. I know that Director Stone put those stakes up quite a while ago to invite public comment. What's the public said?
I haven't had any comments from the public.
There's the public.
He lives a
He
block
has a
over,
conflict.
2 blocks over.
Okay.
Actually, I think Andy, before he put the stakes up sometime last year, also had
Right.
a meeting.
Yes, he did. I think
One
one
person
resident
attended, I think,
showed up.
right? Okay.
I think we
We've
should-
made the attempt, I think, in that, but we have, not, to my knowledge, haven't had public comment. And I'd asked the street department to look through the file, and they did not find anything today when they looked through. Because what I was looking for is I remembered getting the estimate. I didn't have a copy, and I knew you'd want it tonight.
Okay.
Well, we could safely say tonight that we're ready to go ahead with this, so public out there wants to say
Yep.
something,
You can come and-
follow Mr. Baum's example and come tell us.
It'll appear on the next agenda.
Say
Mr.
something,
Baum,
Ed?
please. Thank you for your patience with us.
Yeah, it's yours ticket.
Edward Baum, 20 Sunnyside Drive. As most of you are well aware, over a period of time, I've advocated sidewalks in certain areas of town which have forced, up to this point, children to walk in the streets to get to schools. And this is one of the prime examples. When I, a couple of years ago, went around and talked to neighbors along that street and indicated that council at the time was considering putting in a sidewalk, there was general positive response. Now, this was over 2.5 years ago. When I saw the stakes with the little fluorescent red banners on top, I became particularly encouraged that council would be moving ahead with this project because between Shannon and Watt, people are forced to walk in the streets if they want to get to school, and there are children who live in that area. There's also a dance studio, which requires people to walk in the streets to get to. So I encourage you to proceed with this. The original ordinance on this allocated $30,000, so it's quite a bit of savings when it's down to $20,000 to $22,000. And I commend you for moving ahead with it. Thank you.
Well, Paul really made this happen. He kept at it like a dog with a bone. So here we go. Well, I didn't mean that. I mean, that's, sometimes it takes that. Okay, vending Halloween. When I was looking at this agenda, it occurred to me that we have an ordinance on the table which we need to do something with at the next meeting, and so I bring it up now. My thought, and I tabled it. The reason I tabled it is that I had floated a trial balloon of amending the ordinance to take the additional fee that is proposed for vendors for licensed vendors on Halloween and charge it to the B vendors and not charge it to the A vendors. And that was my attempt to deal with what I perceived to be a kind of a conflict that was going on. And my rationale is this. One is, and I'm certainly not on the street every day, but I don't see the B vendors out very much. Now, that's pretty imprecise, but I don't see them out there very much. And I suspect that there's a buying and holding phenomenon perhaps going on with the B license since it's so modestly priced. The A vendors are out there on a relatively frequent basis. More, they're out there day in and day out, and so it seemed to me that it made sense to, if we're going to charge extra, that we charge extra for the folks who are buying a license to hold for that event, and that's my rationale. So, and then I understand, we've talked about other issues related to vending, and I'm committed to, before January, if we're going to change vending and dive into the vending morass and change it, then let's go. I'm for that. I'm up for that.
Well, speaking as, I had to take care of a slip problem in my neighborhood with the mayor, but.
Okay.
It's so we protect our investment, but I did some calculations, as you know, and I circulated them to you all, and.
Right.
There we have a substantial subsidy going on amongst the A vendors, whereas the B vendors are at the mercy of whoever's parking there. So I brought forward a proposal, which you are aware of, somewhere in the vicinity of a $2,000 license fee. And I use it or lose it on the B side.
Yeah.
With the and I asked the mayor about it a month ago, and he said, it's doable.
Yeah.
It's doable to.
This is for the larger discussion.
Yeah, well, no, but, I don't think you should ever go back from collecting fees. I mean, we're collecting a fee, I think we ought to collect it. Because we are, right now, I'm sure the people who sell books at College Bookstore would love to have that parking place reserved for them for $750 instead of $2,000. So, let's just bite the bullet and keep it the way it is. I may be outnumbered, and I don't mind. I will just scream and holler next week if we do it, because we need that money.
But I do think that the question of vending in general, there are multiple issues. It isn't just the money, and I think that it needs to be carefully looked at and discussed. And I certainly don't think that it's reasonable to think that we can project a huge raise on the vending folks and charge them a fee at Halloween in addition to that. So there's some situations.
And I agree. I think we need to look at the
Right.
And it's more than one space we're talking about.
Look at revenue and look at
The cost to the city?
well, look at revenue and look at tickets and see what's going on with parking spaces and make, because I'd imagine there's a gap. That's kind of what you're pointing out, is that if you
A
look.
big gap.
And there's some equipment
Well, I'm more interested in looking at
issues.
actual than
Right.
theoretical.
Oh.
So I'd like to look at the real
Well, I
numbers.
mean, if we put parking meters there, we could make the money that I'm talking about, probably pretty close to it.
Maybe.
Because,
if you
I
look
had a
at-
student
well,
a couple years ago who did a study, and they said our parking meter usage is the most efficient it was a civil engineering
Yeah.
student. I mean, we have more there'll be some turnover, but that's a primo spot. And I'm not saying get rid of it, I just think that,
Right.
you can't be arguing that it's, these poor A vendors don't,
That's a straw man, no one's ever argued that. I
Well-
think the issue is that you can bracket what you're talking about with between actual, which, as I looked at the numbers, there's 605 meters, and we collect about $650,000 in revenue and tickets. So, by my way of thinking, it's a little over $1,000. Theoretically, if the meter spot is filled every moment, including perhaps maybe, I don't know if you accounted for the free time, but there is some free
did
time.
back it up.
So then there's the other limit, and so it ought to be in the middle there. I agree.
well, no, I mean, there was the statement made in this body before we went on recess that they are paying their fair share, and I think that I demonstrated to you that it was not being paid, and to back off on that fee, just on the basis of that assumption that they pay so much more than the B, is not a fair assumption. That's what I was trying to do when I did
I
that
got it.
calculation.
Yeah. And-
Because the Bs are probably underprivileged comparatively, in the sense, because they have to stuff the meter and pay the fee. So-
In conversations with Steve Pearson, he talked about that the cost of bagging a meter is $5 a day. And at that rate, the total would come out more like $1,500. But it needs a much more full discussion than what we're ready to do before Halloween. We have an ordinance that we need to get through for the Halloween event, and that's a separate issue from looking in depth at vending.
Well, I think that it was made a non-separate issue by coupling it together, and that's exactly why I did my calculations. And maybe we need to raise the bag fee as well, because you're talking about location, and we are also talking about 2 spaces rather than 1, so we can double it probably. We could probably fit 6 cars in there. So why not give the owners of those businesses a chance to park there instead of the A vendors and collect $1,000 each? We obviously don't do it because it's Athens and we have this commitment, but the commitment shouldn't be at a serious cost differential. And, I could say, we haven't done anything with this since 1987, and Rick sponsored the ordinance. And he thought he changed some things that didn't get changed. But, so it's not like it's overdue, or it's not overdue. But you guys brought it up, because I was the one who just put it out there about how unfair it was. Well, I'm sorry.
I'm fine with having the discussion. It just needs to be a full and educated discussion.
And are you?
No.
Debbie, go ahead.
When we take this off the table, it's been
Yeah.
read once.
Yeah, it'll need to be suspended, I think. No matter what happens to it, right? Because
I
it
just
was off its second. well,
wanted to mention that the change that was already made that took out the map and instead put specific streets,
Yeah.
it right now says that at such times determined appropriate by the administration. I think
Yeah.
we need to amend it to say time, place, and manner. I just wanted to let folks know that I think that we need to, make it clear that the administration gets to lay out where vending is gonna happen and all of that, so that the whole street plan works together. So I would intend to offer that amendment.
But if we pass it next week on third, isn't it third reading? I checked with Debbie. I
But
thought
if
it
it's
was.
amended, it would go back to first.
If
that
then we'd
amendment is,
suspend.
any amendment is made, then you'd have to suspend.
I hate to have all this kind of anger over.
You'd say anything else about this?
Is that where it is right now?
Right now,
Paul.
it just says.
I'm not for taking away the $150 fee for the 8 vendors. It looks like it was tabled at second reading, July 18th. I think the discussion of cost for the vending is something different. I agree with that. I'll probably not vote for it anyway because it's one of the Halloween ordinances, but see what we.
Okay. Anything else?
Place and manner, isn't it?
Going once, going twice.
I'm gonna bring up the public defender contract, but we can come back to this if you have some, if y'all are conferring.
Go ahead,
I
I mean,
thought I
it's just
would-
a lot more money, right?
Was
Any-
10% extra?
Anybody else in the audience, pardon me, have a comment on the vending? Okay, public defender, y'all have a handout, looks like from the commissioners, it looks like the public defender contract has increased. There's the news flash, huh? 10%, the amount from last year is written on there. The amount coming up for the, this is a fiscal year item, so it'll be, for the fiscal year, it'll be 122,151.68. Any objections to moving that one forward? Okay, I think we need a public defender. Equipment disposal, I don't have anything on that, no.
I'll have to try to remember all of them. I know there was a repossession of a motorcycle with the police department that has now been forfeited to us. I think it's a Harley, and it'll be worth more than $1,000.
Yes. Okay.
In the purchase of Arch West, they had a organ there that they did not take with them. It really wasn't, it says all appurtenances in our agreement, so I guess it is city property. But the Municipal Arts Commission and the committee that works with Arch West says we should dispose of it and sell it. That should be worth over $1,000, because if you look it up on the other sites, it's between $4,000 and $5,000, I think. And I believe there's another piece of equipment, a rolling stock, that may be over that, but I sent all those emails up to Debbie, and there may be one more. I'll work on it over, but it's that type of thing where it's over $1,000. It'll be the next either public auction or we go to bid on in some manner for these items and recoup something.
All right. So we'll get the itemized list between now and next week, but the idea would be we go ahead and move forward with an ordinance to declare them surplus.
Rick, could I ask you to consider, much as we had the sewage caker considered a separate thing, and we didn't, I mean, if you sent it to the university auction, I think it could go for a very small amount of money, or it could go for a large amount of money. Could we consider just running it separately?
Sure.
I mean, just because it's such a specialized item, then you can go back into Arts West and...
Well, part of the thing there to me is, and I know other cities do this, and I know we ought to at least take a look at it, is eBay.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Because there isn't it's a whole different market and everything. I have to learn a few things, and our folks would, but when you take items such as a Harley motorcycle or an organ, I mean, those are so out of the wall. If we were trying to just do a public auction or ask for bids, or go through the universities, that there may be uniqueness enough in nature that we ought to really look at being a little more creative and looking at them that way.
And extracting more money, and we can plow it
Hopefully.
back into the organization, or to the entity.
Right.
Thank you.
Do you know the regular disposal ordinances that we would pass? Is there anything special you have to do to them to allow
No,
for that type of sale?
I'll look it over and
Okay.
discuss it, and if there is, I mean, we'll just make a little
a good
language
idea.
change, because I don't think we automatically say we're going to go into auction. Because
say disposal.
we're going to go into disposal, and, but the way the ORC reads, anything that we think will have a value over 1,000 has to have council approval to dispose of,
Okay.
which is going to get tougher, because the auditor's talking about raising the capital threshold to 2,000. So how do we sell something that wasn't even a capital purchase? That's still,
Okay.
want to go on the next one?
Yes, sir.
FEMA.
FEMA.
There's two things, a couple things here, just, and I'll go through them fairly quick. We have dispersed and appropriated monies that were for payroll and overtime type aspects of what we've received from FEMA so far this year. We've got another ordinance in right now. It's just transferring some items that were for the tennis court, not the tennis courts, but the fencing at West State, et cetera. Now, what happens after all these happens, because we did the same thing a year ago, is the state, once they're all completed, then comes in and gives us 12.5% more. And that happened
Great.
I want to say January or February. We got to check in for the state share of projects done, like Cable Lane in Richland, concrete backfill, Meadow Lane drainage system repair. We got $4,325, so I got to do another ordinance as I track this one through to get it back out of the FEMA fund so we can use it for other things. And I'll have to go through all that paperwork for that. And just wanted you to know in committee that that's what it is. There's also, I think, about $1,000 we haven't identified yet. It may have been even prior to, it was a beginning balance as of December 31, so we've got to track that down yet. The other thing under FEMA, I did receive finally enough assurances from them that they have approved damaged sewer line for Columbus Road to Courier Lift Station. Their description of it isn't exactly what we want to do, but it's to replace 4,400 feet of, with new line, replace manholes, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks like if, I want to start the process through with some more engineering, but it looks like FEMA's going to reimburse us, including the state share after it's over, about $840,000 of our $1 million or so project cost that we've seen on that. So unless we ought to proceed, we have to look at financing options because FEMA, I'd like it if they'd send me a check for $750,000 for the city, but I guess maybe it reaches a certain amount and they don't do that until you perform the work. But at least we do have, we believe, because they ask us to for our quarterly reporting of it, and so that looks good enough for me to say we need to get back on that list. I sent Nancy a month or more ago about what needs to be done when, and now that we have at least some reimbursement coming in, at least the way, if they come in at their their estimate of cost, we'd get reimbursed 86% of the cost. So.
Better than $1 million.
Do you need anything on the next agenda for either of those items?
I'm going to have to sit down with Nick Carr, he's back from vacation, and work with this along with EMH&T, is that the one? No? Engineering Associates, and say, okay, what do we really want timing-wise for the ordinances now, because I want to try to keep it within our dollar cost as quickly as we can.
Sort of FYI, I plan to put this on the agenda next time, next week, but now it's 2 weeks from now, along with, there are an unbelievable number of machines and so on requested. So I asked you to go back and think about maybe a timing and a sequencing on that, right? So
Right, a lot of it is
talk to him.
because of I've turned him down for a couple of years on a few of those. They've been in the plans.
So
But
how much
Nick
I
tends
have
to
to do?
to lump everything together that if you could have it tomorrow, it'd all be great.
And, okay, so I'll get in and talk to you before 2 weeks from tonight, and we can,
Okay.
I intend to have it on the
Any
agenda.
miscellaneous finance items from anyone?
I'm surprised we're done at 9:30.
Okay, thank you, we're done. Appreciate it.
Unbelievable amount of machines.